Okay, it's time, so I want to kick off this session. Good afternoon. Are you all fine after lunch? Yeah? We don't worry about after lunch dip. A session like this, you don't have to worry about after lunch dip. It doesn't exist. It will be exciting, it will be really cool, so we are not afraid of that. So nice to have you all in this room. My name is RedThread Research. I'm from a new spring, and I have the privilege to share this session this afternoon. And before we start, there's another important thing I have to do, because what I really like of this conference is that special thing that's not copied yet anywhere, and that's the back channel via Twitter. And there are a few ladies here in the room. Ashley, and is Fiona in already? No, maybe she will come later, but please stand up and give her applause. Yes, because they are doing a real good job covering all the sessions via the back channel. That's really nice. Thank you so much for that. And now to the topic. It's very nice to have you all here to learn about learning ecosystems. And we have Dani Johnson over here, who is the co-founder and principal analyst of RedThread. And somebody told me at the start, okay, I'm really looking forward to this session also because we will get some information not only about the buzzword that it might be, but also about research behind. And I think that's really exciting to have those insights this afternoon. And for that, I want to invite Dani on the stage. Please give her a round of applause. Dani, please.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes. Okay, if you cannot hear me at any point, raise your hand. I've been told I don't project very well. I'm really excited to be here today to talk about some research that we've recently done on learning technology ecosystems. This came about because if most of you have wandered the floor downstairs, it's kind of chaos. It's crazy. Everybody's saying the same things and nobody knows how technologies go together. And so we took 4 or 5 months last year and started asking learning leaders, ones that we really admired and ones that were just getting started on the journey, what they did, how they saw it, what worried them, what they paid attention to, and how they put their ecosystems together. We ended up interviewing 32 leaders. They were very generous with their time. You have no idea how hard it is to get all of this information out. And they were also very generous with their candidness. They were very candid with us about the problems that they face, as well as the technologies that they use in their organizations. And we had about 6 of them let us publish their entire ecosystems. So I'll give you a link to the report after I'm done here, but you can go in and see examples of 6 ecosystems as they were presented to us. And I'll show you 3 of them here today. So I want to start with, here I am. I'm Dani Johnson, RedThread Research. We're a research and advisory firm. We focus exclusively on human capital technology. And the practices that go along with human capital. So we keep track of both sides and then help those 2 groups sort of communicate together. We do research advisory and education, and this is how you get a hold of me if you want to. And we'll flash this up again at the end in case you have questions you would like to answer that we didn't address here. So, why ecosystems? There are basically 2 reasons. The first one is expectations. So the really good news is that organizations need results and they're willing to pay for it. There have been lots and lots of changes in the past 5 years. Digitalization is a really big conversation. Upskilling is a really big conversation. And finally, the C-suite is starting to pay attention. They're starting to realize that learning and development is not just a cost center that you need to have so that you remain compliant. It actually can be a competitive advantage if people pay attention to it the right way. A little bit of data for you. 27% of L&D leaders state a limited budget as a top challenge. A lot of you in the room are probably thinking, that's not me, I definitely have a limited budget. But according to LinkedIn, only 27% of L&D leaders are currently saying that that's a top challenge. That means that leaders are more apt to invest in learning and development than they have been in the past, which is really good news. The other thing is, L&D is often sat on the side of the organization being a cost center, being something that took you away from your work. But LinkedIn says that 82% of L&D leaders report that leadership actively supports learning programs. So in the past 5 years, we've seen it shift from I have no budget and my leaders don't care to I finally have some budget and my leaders really care that this gets done because upskilling is a conversation and so is obsolescence of skills. The other people that have expectations of learning and development are the employees themselves. They want better experiences, and they're starting to demand it. This is also LinkedIn data. 68% want to learn at work. I'm kind of horrified that that's not higher, but 68% want to learn at work. 58% prefer to learn at their own pace, and 49% would like to learn at the point of need. So if you think about the choices we had 20 years ago, it was either a classroom experience or it was a really standard e-learning course. Today, the market is crazy, as you saw downstairs, because some of these needs are being manifest. They're coming up to the top and people have to start paying attention to them to make sure that those employees that we have get the skills they need to help our organizations move forward. The other thing that's happening, the other reason that the tech ecosystem is becoming a conversation is because we have a choice. There are lots and lots of choices. We keep a database of learning tech vendors. We currently have 210 people in that database, and we have a list of 60 others that we need to talk to. So it's crazy. There are 200 vendors downstairs. We all know that it's hard to sort of pick through. Everybody's saying the exact same thing. This right here is a curve that represents when those companies were founded. So you can see it's crazy right here. We're at exponential growth. This little bit up here that's kind of flattened out, it's not because it's flattened out, it's because these represent the days, the years that they were founded, and it usually takes a year, year and a half for them to hit the market. So we expect that curve to keep on going up like that. We also have a lot of choice in the types of functionalities we offer our employees. So it used to be an LMS, I mentioned in classroom training. When we went to the market and started asking the vendors what they provide, actually they told us they do these 30 things. So they're going to market in 30 different ways. It's no longer just an LMS anymore. It's no longer, an e-learning course. All of these things are being used for learning, and learning vendors are selling these things. And if you look at that by vendors, so if we take the 210 vendors and ask them what they do, this is what comes up. So over on this side right here, you can see that 85 of those 210 vendors say they do some sort of content creation. It used to be that content creation was a completely separate kind of technology. Content creation is now being wrapped into a lot of the technologies that we see. Over on the end down here, we see some of these things that are up and coming. Expertise directories, helping people find people in the organization that can help them. Project marketplaces, kind of a gig economy internally, so you can learn skills and knowledge from short assignments. And then some things in the middle. The AR, VR, wherever that went, has been around for a while. It's kind of made a comeback in the last couple of years, and my opinion is, I still don't know on that one. But you can see that these 30 things and the types of things that vendors are offering, there are choices. Even that very last one, expertise directories, there are 8 choices for the types of for vendors for an expertise directory. So it's getting harder and harder and harder to choose between these. And so when we talk to these vendors, not only did they share their technology with us, but they also shared the things that they pay attention to when they choose technologies. And these are the 4 things that they said. The first one was philosophy. You've got to have a philosophy. The second one is structure. Third one is sustainability. And then the fourth one is evolution. So we're going to go into each one of these. I'll give you some examples and talk a little bit more about each one. Let's start with philosophy. Honestly, I'm not sure why, but I didn't really expect this one to come out as strongly as it did. But all of the organizations that we talked to said you need to have a philosophy in order to make decisions about what you're doing. And what they mean by that is if you don't know where you're going, if you don't know what kind of ecosystem you want to build, it's very hard to make decisions and compare different things. So for example, if you're the largest consulting firm in the world and 70% of your workforce is mobile, and you're very relationship driven, you're going to choose really different technologies than if you're a smaller organization that all sits in one place that doesn't really need to collaborate because all their jobs are really different. So making sure that you know where you're going and what you're trying to do, what your audiences need, what your organizations need, and what your IT structure is really important to sort of framing that philosophy. There are some risks to not having a philosophy. The first one is buying the new and shiny. I think we've probably all been guilty of that, even if it's not technology for learning. We've all bought something new and shiny. These shoes, for example, new and shiny. Buying things that are new and shiny but don't necessarily meet business needs. Pardon me. So AI is a big buzzword out there right now. You probably heard it a lot downstairs. Not everybody needs AI. Not every situation requires AI. And so understanding what you actually need and what's out there and then being able to compare the two saves a lot of money and saves a lot of heartache downstream. Not understanding what you have company-wide is another one. Those companies that tend to form a philosophy for learning technology tend to look company-wide and see what's out there. So we talked to one company a couple of years ago that had 27 different LMSs. That was just their LMSs. Everybody was using something completely different. Those companies that have a philosophy are those that kind of get together and decide who has what and if that actually helps move the organization forward rather than duplicating efforts and duplicating costs. And then finally, and this is probably the one that I like the most, uneven and incohesive employee experience. Technology should align with, if not further, your employee experience. When we choose technologies that don't necessarily align, it causes a little bit of cognitive dissonance in the learning experience that employees are having in our organization and makes it much less effective. So the first thing that we need to think about when we're trying to form a philosophy is enabling versus providing. So this is a chart put together by Josh Bersin in 2015 when this was likely true. I use it as an example because if you look at this, these are all things that you can provide. You can provide a learning experience platform, you can provide an LRS, content libraries, assessment, development, delivery tools, etc. These are all things that you can provide. But just putting these things together doesn't create a good, cohesive learning tech ecosystem. It's just providing stuff. Instead, when we started talking to leaders and when we started talking to the vendors, we realized that instead of just providing stuff, we're actually trying to enable several things in the organization. These 6 right here, plan, discover, consume, experiment, connect, and perform, these are behaviors we want our employees to adapt and adopt for learning. These 2 things right here are hygiene things that we need to do as an L&D to make sure that L&D continues. So plan, whether we like it or not, L&D is now responsible to help their employees plan their learning. It's no longer a ladder, they move all over the place, and so each individual probably has a different need for a different plan. That's our job now, and how we do that really depends on what our organization needs. Discover, the conversation about curation has been going on forever. How do we help people discover the opportunities and the content that they need in order to develop? Consume, we're all familiar with this one. This is how we get content to people. Experiment, we're now on the hook more and more to help people experiment with new knowledge and skills, to try it out, to fail, to learn from those failures. Connect, in the early days this was called social learning, but now it's just networking within an organization and learning what you can from people. Perform, more and more people are learning at the point of need and they're learning how to perform better at the same time that they're learning. And that's also our responsibility. Manage and create is, or we all know what that is. It's creating content and managing learners. And then finally, analyze, becoming a bigger deal. So, right now, the people that we're talking to spend about 80% of their time on consume and manage and create. We do this largely because we know how. It's what our job has been for the last 100 years. There's nothing wrong with these 2 areas. They're important to a learning tech ecosystem and they're important to a learning structure. But what we really should be paying attention to is these things. So we need to switch our mindset from creating stuff and throwing it to the learners to really start thinking about the process and the experience we're creating for our learners by paying attention to all of these things. When you take those 30 functionalities, those 30 tech functionalities, and align them with the things we're trying to do as L&D professionals, this is what you get. I'm going to give you a second to absorb that, take it in. So when we're creating a learning technology ecosystem, instead of focusing I want to make sure I'm getting the right thing here, right here, and right here, which is where we focused in the past, and you can tell because there are so many technologies and functionalities in those areas, we now have all of these options. Some of them are together in the same technology, and some of them are split up, and deciding how they go together is a really big deal. It's hard. But learning to think about the experience we want to create rather than the things that we're going to provide is a really important step to getting the learning tech ecosystem right. Turns out that of the people that we interviewed, there's an average of 11 functionalities per organization. So if you look at this right here, 11 of these bad boys. Where's my little thing? These right here. They're using 11 different functionalities and even more technologies. So in some cases, they'll use many things for consume. They'll use more than one video library. They'll use more than one gamification, whatever. So 11 functionalities and many more technologies. Even the ones, strangely, even the ones who thought, when we sat down, they said, we just have an LMS. I don't know why you're talking to me. It turns out as we walked through this exercise right here and listed all of these types of things, they were able to come up with 10 or 20 where they thought they were just using the LMS. And that's troubling because that means that the learning department is focusing almost exclusively on the LMS when there are all of these other things that they're not leveraging at all. So 11 is the average. Incidentally, I'm just throwing this up here. This is a tool that we've got sitting on our website right now. It basically taps into the database that I was talking about of all the vendors. We ask all the vendors what they do. If you click on any of these little dots right here, it'll pop up the organization and tell you what they say they do and give you sort of our high level, this is what we think of this company based on a couple of criteria. You can see this at redthread.com, redthreadresearch.com, or you can shoot me a note and I'll send you the link exactly. I couldn't find it in time. Okay, so the second thing for a philosophy, the second mindset we need to have is we need to be able to design, not assemble. We're not just putting things together, we actually need to design. And that basically has three things. The first one is simplicity. A lot of times we put stuff in because we can put stuff in. But what we're trying to do with the learning tech ecosystem is create a signal through the noise. We're trying to get across a message and help them understand the path forward. And a lot of times there's just so much noise in our learning tech ecosystems that we just can't do that. So 3 tips for that. The first one is have an intention and be clear about your intention. We want you to develop these skills for this reason, and this is how we want you to do it. Some of that comes with structure, which we'll talk about in a second. Some of it comes with this third one, marketing, which we'll also talk about in a second. The second one here is elimination. This one's really scary for a lot of learning teams. If it doesn't work for you, get rid of it. There's no point in keeping it around. Just get rid of it. Make it simple and don't let it create noise in your system. And then that third one is marketing. We have heard in the last 10 years a lot about marketing, the L&D department. How you communicate what learning is in your organization through words, but also through how that learning tech ecosystem is set up, makes a big deal on the adoption and the ability to create that signal through the noise. So that's number 1. Number 2 is accounting for all of your employees. As we were talking to organizational leaders, they mentioned some of these things. We're a global company and our frontline workers on the floor in a retail store don't have access to hardware. So what does that mean for my ecosystem? I have people in China who are pretty rural and they don't have the bandwidth we need to run this particular technology. What does that mean for my ecosystem? Firewalls, kind of a big deal in companies that have data security issues. Unions, another big one. Can we require these people or can we provide things to these people that they can do offline, or is that against union rules? And then the fifth one we heard was 5 generations in the workforce. I wish this one weren't true, but it is. We need to pay attention to all 5 of those generations. I think sometimes we stereotype thinking that certain of those generations prefer things over other things, but we should have an idea of what our audiences are and pay attention to what they're used to and what they're comfortable with. And then finally, all tech. A lot of times when we think about learning tech ecosystems, we only think about the technology that shows up on our business, our P&L, what do you call it? Our budget, in our budget. But there are actually 3 types. There's the purchase tech, which are those things like LMSs and LXPs and those types of things that have learning tech and show up on our budget. There's the adopted tech, which exists in your organization that somebody else is paying for, but you can leverage for learning in your organization. We've heard about people using Teams and Slack a lot. That's coming up a lot. We're also hearing people use things like Microsoft Flow and all kinds of other things to help disseminate information and get people on board with the same ideas. And then the third one is enabled tech. I was talking to somebody yesterday at another event who mentioned that they were working with a company who they just couldn't get any adoption for their tool at all. So the company took a look at what was going on and decided to use WhatsApp, because everybody in the company was already on WhatsApp and already using WhatsApp. WhatsApp was not purchased by the organization, so it's not an adopted tech, but it was an enabling tech, meaning they picked something out that was already being used and they adapted it and adopted it for the organization so that they could leverage the momentum that tool already had. So we've heard a lot about WhatsApp lately, YouTube, obviously, just plain search tools, Google, all of these things can be enabled tech, but as L&D we need to pay attention to the firewalls and the permissions that we give our employees to be able to use these if we're going to use them at all. So I just put them all on the screen in case somebody wanted to take a shot of that. Okay, so our example for this is Centric Consulting. Centric Consulting is a very, very small L&D group, and they don't have a lot of money. So what they did is they actually used a lot of adopted and adapted technology. So you can see up here, this circle right here is all the purchase technology, and then this out here is all of the adapted technology. They have purchased some things, they've made some really good purchases here, but the adapted technology is what is really interesting to me. She actually went out to the organization and looked at everything she had to pull in the things that she could learn specifically for learning, use specifically for learning. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there before we go into structure and just take a few questions, because I'm feeding you guys with a fire hose. So I want to make sure we don't lose any of the questions. Does anybody have any questions about philosophy?
Wait a minute. Please, people around there, there's enough space here. So if you want to sit down, please look for a chair and join us over here. This is the right moment for that.
Just a quick question. I'm assuming this is as equally applicable to extended learning. You could swap out employees for all learners if you're interested in customer or partner training.
Yeah.
Is it equally applicable?
We did, yeah. We talked to a couple of organizations that did have extended enterprise. They were worrying about channel partners and customers and those types of things. Absolutely. Any other questions on some of this stuff?
Must be more questions, I'm sure, yeah.
When asking all of the leaders, how much was it focused about the here and now of their organizations? And was there any consideration about the future of work and where that's going to be kind of heading to from an ecosystem perspective?
Yeah, so I have good news and bad news. The bad news is we asked them about what they have right now. So a couple of them mentioned the things that they were putting into place or wanted to put into place. The good news is the 8 bubbles are generation agnostic. It doesn't matter. The technologies that are listed under those are the ones that we know of today. We're thinking there will probably be more, but it's agnostic. If they're paying attention to those 8 bubbles and what kinds of technology fall in each, they should be covered. Any other questions?
Yeah, over here. So there will be 4 parts, and after each part, some time for Q&A.
I'm just curious, you talk about learning tech ecosystems as opposed to learning ecosystems. Where do you see the principles here applying to the learning ecosystem?
Very glad you mentioned that. We actually just barely started some research on what organizations do internally that don't necessarily involve technology that fit those 8 bubbles. So it is a learning ecosystem. We're at a tech conference, so this is specifically for technology, but yes, absolutely. Organizations should pay attention to those 8 bubbles and see what systems and processes and other things sort of fit under them to help with the learning.
Last one for this moment.
Okay.
Yeah, gentleman over there.
What would an example of a philosophy look like? Are these multi-page documents? Is it a simple sentence? Is it a series of technologies that have to interface together? What is that?
It's not a series of technologies. It's more how are we going to make decisions about what we're going to buy. So usually it includes what audiences are we trying to solve and what do our audiences look like and prefer. what are our business strategies, what do we actually need these people to do, and what are our tech limits? Have we talked to the IT department, and do we understand what limits we have to work within? Okay, let's move on.
Yep.
Thanks, sir. Structure was the second thing that organizations need to worry about when they're creating learning tech ecosystem. When we were talking to these organizations, we found that all of them fall on a spectrum, and I'm going to introduce 3 different types of structures. The first one is one platform. We call this one door, one room, which basically means all of your learning is in one place, and there's one door to get to that. Many of the tech vendors that you talk to downstairs will say, this is what we are. We can do everything for you, and all of our learning happens in one place. That is hardly ever true. Even the organizations who told us at the beginning that they were just one, they only used one thing, usually came up with several that they were using. So one door, one platform, all learning is theoretically in one place. The second one is one door, several rooms. So you have one central tool acting as the front door, and then other tools are integrated and accessed as needed. Some people build that front door, that tool in the front door, and some use something. It's usually like an LMS or an LXP. Sometimes it's a, what do they call those things? You know, those things where you go for asynchronous learning, but you're doing it together, cohort learning platforms, those types of things. So it's usually one of those big things in the middle, and then they put things on the outside. One door, several rooms to get what you want there. And then pure ecosystem. We talked to exactly 2 companies that said that they follow a pure ecosystem sort of philosophy. This is multiple doors and multiple rooms. This one's scary because it can become chaotic very, very easily. But this is basically employees access what they want, how they want it. There are many doors and there are many ways to get to that. Organizations that are trying to do this are more often than not trying to integrate the learning into the work. So they're using a lot of Slack integrations and things like that to make it accessible wherever they are, instead of having to find out where the tool is that they go to get this type of information. Interestingly, as I mentioned, they follow on a spectrum from one platform to pure ecosystem. And there are characteristics for these 2 sides. So if you're using one platform, or if you're more apt to use one platform, you usually have a similar workforce, which means you're not dealing with different languages, you're not dealing with front office, back office, retail, those types of things. It's usually one kind of workforce. Second one is low tolerance for risk. So some organizations are all about experimenting, some organizations are not about experimenting at all. And most that don't want to experiment happen down toward the one platform. They buy one platform that has as many things as they think they could possibly want, and then try and pick and choose based on that. Third one is org-driven development. Organizations on this side generally have an idea of what kind of learning they want to provide. A lot of it is provided by the organization. It's not necessarily exploratory. There's a heavy focus on compliance. One platform is sometimes very necessary in smaller organizations that just need to make sure that their people are taking compliance training so that they can maintain their licenses. It's not a bad thing, it's just a different thing. And then finally, low budget flexibility. And what I mean by budget flexibility is, one of the questions that we ask these 32 companies is, how do you structure your budgets for learning technology? 10 years ago when I was asking this question, even 5 years ago when I was asking this question, we got a lot of, well, we get about $10 million every 10 years to redo our LMS. And that was their budget flexibility for tech. Now it's a little bit different. There are a lot of smaller technologies, and there's a different mindset. People are plugging and playing and moving things around, and so the budget is, they might have the same budget, but it's spread out over those 10 years instead of a big lump sum at the end of the year, at the end of the decade. So the characteristics on the other side, not surprisingly, are very opposite of those. Varied workforces. If you have wildly varied workforces, if you have salespeople and retail people and back-end people and people on the floor, et cetera, you usually have more of a pure ecosystem. You're finding the things where you need them when you need them. There's generally a high tolerance for risk, which means they're willing to explore and move things around and take things out and put things back in. It's an employee-driven development. If you have many doors, that means you have a little bit more freedom about what you're going to find and how you're going to find it, which means you need your employees to be driven. There's a heavy focus on exploration, and then there's usually very high budget flexibility. Anybody want to take a guess where most of the organizations we talked to landed? In the middle? Toward the end? I was very pleasantly surprised that most of them are right there. So they're just slightly right of center. So we found that the conversations about structure came in really handy when you're trying to decide how to structure this. And the conversations that you're having with IT, they want to know stuff like this. So deciding what your philosophy is and then deciding what your structure is on how to accomplish that helps everybody be on the same page about what you're trying to accomplish. One of the organizations that we talked to was a multinational manufacturing company, and this is what their tech ecosystem looked like. I don't think you guys can see it, but there's actually a circle that goes right here. So this one used sort of a central model. They used Degreed and NovoEd mostly, and you can see them pop up along here a lot. That means they're using them for more than one thing, and then they augmented where they needed to in order to fill out their tech ecosystem. All right, that one was a very short section. Are there any questions about structures?
Yeah, you mentioned that you found that a lot of, Hi, you mentioned that you found that a lot of organisations sat sort of in the middle to the right of those structures. How many of those organisations found themselves there by design or by coincidence?
That is a fantastic question. You see this word right there? Almost all of them were intentional. Yeah, very good question.
Yeah, when you've got systems towards the right-hand side of that spectrum there, to what extent is there a lot of bespoke data integration, that sort of thing going on? You've got obviously single sign-on to move between applications, but if data's being held in multiple sources, sure you want to report on it in a unified way and that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So how much of that kind of work has gone on? And how essential do you see that work?
So I'm going to answer that in two parts. The first thing is back-end integrations are getting much, much easier. Everybody that I talk to all the vendors that I'm talking to are talking about APIs, and we all know that those are complicated, but at least they're thinking about them. So that's happening. The second thing that's happening is, I completely just lost my train of thought. Yeah, it's gone. I'm sure it will come back. But the integrations in the back end are getting much, much better. And vendors are starting to think about that stuff. So it's not just the IT department trying to figure it out on the company side. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. Some of the vendors that we talked, some of the organizations that we talked to said, hey, if I have a problem, I pull all the vendors in and make them work together to figure it out. So there's a lot more of that going on as well. Vendors are having to work together because customers are requiring it in order to get that back end stuff worked out. Hey, Mark.
Yes. Does this work? Yeah, it works.
It works.
So Dani, this is a great slide. Have you found that some of the companies actually have, I guess with these double side arrows, maybe two x-axes? One for business as usual, which could be this, then another one for more innovative exploratory approaches.
No. But what I have seen is that organizations that sit right here are able to integrate some things in that they just want to try out. And a lot of them are doing that with the IT department because the IT department, they need their buy-in. And they're tech savvy, so they try it out with the IT department. So when we talk about learning tech ecosystems for an organization, I don't know if I want to say this or not. I think I do. When we're talking about a learning tech ecosystem for an organization, we're talking about the entire organization. And those that are doing it intentionally are paying attention to all of the other people and what their needs are, but the tech ecosystem is one. And in most cases, they're doing either something like this or something like this to make sure they're meeting the needs of everybody.
Okay, last one. I think this side can do a bit better, don't you think?
I think so too.
Yeah. Maybe for the next round, but yeah, okay, great.
Thanks for taking one for the team.
So on pure ecosystems, you talk about multiple doorways to multiple rooms. Can the doorways be different hardware and accessibility points as well as different platforms?
Yes, that's also a very good question. So we're actually seeing some technology come up through. It's really interesting. For frontline workers, they have completely different entry points. And so retail logins, when you're clocking in, those types of things are also being used as learning stations now.
That's what we're looking at the moment, because with minimum wage changes and the ability to train basic training outside of work, we've got learners who their preferred style of learning is outside of work on their own devices, but we can't allow them to do it. So
Yeah.
we're the first ever learner providers that won't allow people to learn.
Yeah.
Sorry, Dani, now I have to take the
Okay,
consequences.
good.
Yeah, that's how it works.
You challenged us, that's what you get. So my question is, so many of the companies that I work with, often I see that compliance training, while obviously that's important, especially in highly regulated environments, it's hijacking decisions around the broader ecosystem. So what are some of the best ways that you've seen that companies have gotten around that to have the best of both worlds?
So in some situations, like I don't think the LMS is going away. I don't even think it should go away. It's a place to track stuff, and especially for compliance training, it needs to be a part of that ecosystem. The point is just how big of a deal you make it. So in this case, you're making it a huge deal. In this case, it's kind of a deal, and in this case, it's just one of the family. So don't let them do it, I guess. Pay attention to the things that they absolutely need to do for compliance, and provide them the other options for the rest of the learners and types of learning. Okay, so the third one is sustainability. It takes a village to make a learning tech ecosystem work. We want to talk about sustainability in two parts. The first is internal sustainability. There are things that need to happen internally to make the tech ecosystem work, and people you need to involve. And then external sustainability, is this tool going to be in the market in 2 or 3 years? As far as internal sustainability, you need to involve your stakeholders. There are a set of 5 stakeholders that we recommend that you pay attention to. The first one is senior leadership for a couple of reasons. First of all, they usually determine your budget, so making sure that they're on board is a really, really good idea. They also set the tone for the rest of the organization. So if you have leaders saying that they're on board with learning in general, those organizations are much more likely to do the learning that needs to happen. Second one is HR partners. In most organizations, L&D still routes up through HR. And so understanding what the overall people goals are for the organization and helping those HR partners distribute the information throughout is really helpful. The learning tech ecosystem can actually help the HR partners a lot if you bring them in early and help them understand what you're trying to do and understand what they're trying to do. Third one is the IT function. I mentioned this when you asked that question. It's crucial that you have a good relationship with your IT department. We've talked to a couple of organizations who have an IT L&D person. Some of them call them a product manager, some of them call them an IT L&D person. But the purpose of that person is to act as a bridge to be able to talk the talk to IT and make sure that they understand what L&D is trying to accomplish so that they can integrate some of these things into the larger business. As I mentioned also, IT is a really good guinea pig. We've seen this repeatedly in some organizations where they use IT. They actually say, hey, IT, we want to try this new technology on you. Can we? Those IT people will try it out. If it works for them, then they're much more likely to help integrate it into the organization than they would be otherwise if L&D just came to them and said, hey, here's another job for you. Fourth one is embedded L&D. We talked a little bit before about some of the challenges that we face when we're trying to integrate technologies. A lot of L&D departments now belong to the business. They don't belong to the central function. And so understanding what the embedded L&D folks are facing and what they need and what characteristics their people are is crucial to making sure that your tech ecosystem is right. And then the final one is users and employees. We talked to a couple of organizations that actually have like a steering committee of users and employees who basically say that's a stupid idea or yes, I'd love to try that. Just to make sure that adoption will be good and that they're taking into account all the needs of the individuals. Second, external sustainability. We got this question over and over and over again when we were talking to people, and every time we present this information. How do I know that a company is going to be around in 5 years? How do I make decisions? How do I build a tech ecosystem with some of these new types of technologies and these new functionalities if I don't know if it's actually going to work? So we asked several of the organizations how they vetted vendors. And this is what they said. The first thing they said was, we find customers with similar challenges. If they go to a tech vendor and the vendor cannot provide them with a customer with a similar challenge, they pass almost immediately. Just promises are empty. Proof is what you're looking for in this case. Don't just read the case study, actually ask to talk to the vendor. If the other organization likes the vendor, they'll more than likely be happy to talk to you about it. The second one is the confidence of investors. Tons and tons and tons of VC money is being dumped into the learning tech space right now, just a lot. I'm not saying confidence of investors should be relied on solely, But if an organization is getting a lot of venture capital funding, chances are that they'll be around for at least a little while. And in the case of really, really young companies, they have a little bit of adult supervision. Third one is longevity in the marketplace. This cuts both ways. An organization that has been in the marketplace way too long can be stayed and have a code base that isn't flexible and all those types of things, whereas an organization that has been in the market for just a minute doesn't have the experience they need in order to make something work. We talked to one leader that said that he looked for vendors that had been in the market for about 5 years because they had proven that they had staying power, but they were still flexible enough and able to work with him to solve the problems that he had. The fourth one, and this one is probably my favorite, a robust and innovative roadmap. As an analyst, we are always asking about the roadmaps. People are very open with us, but they should be open with you too if you're thinking of purchasing. If they can show you a robust roadmap, even if it doesn't have the things on it that you think you need, they're thinking ahead and they're paying attention to what their customers want, and they're likely going to stay ahead of the market. And then the final one, evidence of partnering, not just supplying. We talked to a leader a little while ago that basically said, I use my vendors as an extension of my L&D team. My L&D team has a specific function in my organization, but we rely on the vendors and their forward thinking in order to get us out of our ruts. They are looking into lots of companies and they are paying attention to the market and what's selling out there and what's going on. And so there should be evidence of partnering, just not supplying. 5 years ago, you kind of had to buy into the philosophy of the vendor and kind of take what the vendor gave you. It was more of an implementation process. Today, if they're not partnering with you, they're most likely not worth your time. That might sound harsh, but that's how I feel. This is the example for sustainability. Shopify, Andrew, I don't know if he's here or not. When we talked to him, this is what he outlined for us. These are the types of technologies that he uses. Interestingly, Shopify has a distributed L&D team, which means they are as part of the businesses, but they have a central function for purchasing L&D technology. And the reason that they do that is so that they can get economies of scale and make better decisions on what their learning tech ecosystem looks like. It also gives them a chance to take a look at all of the technology that's being used in all of the company, even if it's being funded in different places, so that they can leverage that across. All right, any questions on sustainability? Chris?
I have a question about just on that last slide.
Is it hard?
And maybe it's a kind of, I should have, no, the next one. Maybe I should have paid attention better earlier. But are you implying that this ecosystem, in this ecosystem, all those elements are connected or even reportable?
No, that's a really good question. They're not all connected. They shouldn't even all be connected. It's sort of up to the organization to decide what's connected and what's not connected. So when we talked about the three, it's gonna take forever to go back in. This right here. So in one platform they're connected, in central system they're likely connected. But a lot of them are popping up right here because not everything is connected. Not everything should be connected.
Yeah, can I have a follow-on question? Yeah, please. So this sort of plethora of money going into ed tech from venture capitalists and this expansion of vendors it's not quite an apples to apples comparison. So perhaps in the old days, to build software, you needed to build a platform and assemble a bunch of people, and it was kind of a hard thing to do. In today's world, you can spin up a software company with 2 guys and an Amazon Web Services account, right?
Yep.
And so we're seeing this like fracturing. A lot of these applications have very, very fine-grained functionality. Right. How are you seeing that play out in the infrastructure context?
Yeah, so this is a conversation, this is an argument actually that Josh Burson and I have all the time. A lot of those smaller companies are being bought, and a lot of them go into business so that they can be bought, and that's fine. But as you mentioned, you can spin up an organization with nothing. And there's a bigger appetite for that now than there's ever been before. Partly because people are more apt to taking risks, but also if you look at your phone, you get information in all those different places. Our minds are being conditioned to think differently about where we get information and what we need to do to get it. I don't think I think the market will contract a little bit, but I don't think it will contract as much as Josh does. You can have that argument with him if you want. I think for the first time in the history of learning tech, some of these smaller organizations have legs. We did a quick sort of look at how many functionalities each of the vendors do, and 54% of them have 10 functionalities or less. So of the 30, and some of the bigger guys say that they have all 30, but 54%, or half the market, are these point solutions that people are learning to integrate because they've figured out the back end or we're starting to pay attention to some of that integration stuff. Did that answer your question? Awesome. Other questions?
Me again. On the extended enterprise stuff, did you come across anybody who was delivering to partners and customers and employees? The reason I ask in one ecosystem is we've got lots of stakeholders who would say our sales enablement ecosystem is great, our partner ecosystem is great, our customer ecosystem is great, our employee, and so on and so forth. So we end up with like 6 or 7 of these where each individual function in the organization considers that their ecosystem is fine, but the company's ecosystem isn't particularly healthy.
Yeah. So to that, yes, we did talk to a couple of people. All the doors aren't open to all the people. So there are keys to all of those different doors. So whether you're a central system, central hub, and people have access to some of those doors, or whether you're the free ecosystem, people have access to some of those doors or not. I still think all organizations should look at their entire ecosystem, because if not, you're wasting money and time trying to maintain everything. But yes, absolutely, people will have access to some of those doors and not others. Mark.
So Chris asked a great question about all the bubbles needing to be connected. And you said in many cases they don't have to.
Mm-hmm.
But from a data interoperability perspective, I think they should be. So what's your perspective?
So that's an opinion. I don't necessarily have that opinion. I think in situations where you're trying to track every single thing that every single person does for learning, you're just going to frustrate the hell out of yourself. Some things need to be tracked, some things don't need to be tracked, and I think there are better ways to track than necessarily hooking everything in together. One of the things that I spoke yesterday, and one of the things I mentioned there was it isn't always about getting the information tracked in your system and maintaining it in your system and drawing conclusions from your system. It's also about getting the information in your system out. And so how does your tech ecosystem sort of interact with the rest of the organization's tech ecosystem, and what kind of information can you draw there? But even then, I don't know that everything needs to be tracked. I think that's sort of an opinion we all sort of need to get over. ROI doesn't matter that much. It's the impact that we can have on the organization that actually does matter. I know that was probably, we can talk about it later, Mark.
Okay.
Anything else here? One more over here.
Yeah.
Just a question, when you mentioned the internal and external stakeholders, I was wondering if there's room for a third party who is like neutral, she's not a vendor, but she could be an advocate for the client or the L&D team. Did any of your cases use a third party in this way, or do you see it as a possibility?
No, we did not talk to anybody that did that, but I think it's a good idea. I see a really big need, actually, for people that understand the space and understand the challenges of the organization and can help marry those two things together. But none of the companies we talked to had that.
In a lot of these organizations, there's multiple touch points for learners to go to achieve their learning, separate places to go for that. How are these organizations mitigating the risk of the learners just getting confused and not being able to effectively navigate efficiently to find what they want quick enough?
And it depends on, again, your philosophy. So we talked to one guy who's like, I want people to be able to access it wherever they are. And he had a free ecosystem. We have others that almost always integrate. The central one, they almost always integrate into a front door. So LXPs are used a lot as a front door, LMSs in some cases. So it is about creating the signal through the noise, but I think you have to understand the characteristics of your organization and what's acceptable to them to understand what's chaos and what's not.
Okay, let's move forward to the last part and then see how much time is left.
See how fast I can talk. All right, continuous evolution is the fourth thing that organizations should pay attention to when they are creating a learning tech ecosystem. We need to learn to embrace the uncertainty. Things are not going to remain the same, and we need to be okay with that. Just like real ecosystems, learning ecosystems have to adjust to what's going on inside the organization, but also what's going on the outside of the organization. So they should constantly be monitoring their ecosystem. We have 3 things. There are many more things you should be paying attention to, but I'll hit on 3. The first one is the user experience. I mentioned earlier that you should understand what that user experience is. You should definitely be monitoring it. Don't just set it and forget it. You actually need to think about it. So does it offer employees choice? Does it go beyond the formal? Does it motivate people to actually develop themselves? Is it easy to navigate? Is it unambiguous? Pay attention to the user experience. Second one is effectiveness. Is it actually doing it what we wanted it to do? Is it helping improve performance? Are people developing the skills that they needed to? Does it fuse with the work itself? Does it serve all the employees? Is it effective as a learning tech ecosystem? If it isn't, then let's fix it so it is. And then finally, alignment. Does it share info with the employees? Does it connect employees together? Does it provide actionable insights to those employees? Does it integrate with the larger ecosystems like we were just talking about? And does it meet those business needs? If these things aren't true, then there's something broken in the ecosystem and it needs to be fixed until it is. I'll give you a second. And that brings us to understanding the usage. So, not everything needs to be tracked, but you should have an idea of the usage of the systems that you're using. This is a great quote. It's one of my favorites. Without data, you're just another person with an opinion. It's really important to pay attention to data. We as L&D professionals are not good at it. Most of the tools that we talked about, most of the vendors that we talk to have some sort of analytics tool with them. How people are using it and what kind of information you're getting from them is starting to be more important than... When I was talking to you, Mark, I was thinking mostly about completion data and assessment data and those types of things. Any technology that you have, you should understand who's using it and how they're using it, if it's meeting the needs and if it isn't. And the way that you do that is you correlate that and look at it from the business standpoint and see how it's affecting things in the organization. We recently completed a report called Having Learning Impact, which talks about it. It's a sort of a philosophical dive into what learning measurement and analytics should look like. My partner also recently did a paper on people analytics in general that hits on this a little bit as well, which talks a lot more about that integration that you might want to check out. If you want access to this report or the people analytics report, just shoot us an email and we can make sure you get that. The third thing is to divest to invest. This is a phrase from Barry Murphy at Airbnb. Sunset the stuff that doesn't work and use those resources for other things in your organization. If you want to try something and you have a limited budget, get rid of something that's not working to plug in there. Vidya Krishnan, the CLO of Ericsson, I was doing a panel with her once and she said, sometimes things just die and that's okay. Sometimes we get strong and it's okay, or sometimes something came up and what worked before doesn't work anymore. That's okay. It just means that we're going to unplug it and plug something in that works rather than continuing to double down on a decision we made that's no longer valid. And then finally, be decisive. Another phrase that came up a couple of times was indecision kills the vision. Intentionally make decisions quickly. Too much indecision means that you're stalled and unable to take any sort of action. So the quote here is from a CLO of a large consumer goods company. In a world that moves quickly, bad decisions are often better than no decisions, which is scary for L&D folks because our entire job and our entire existence has been around mitigating risk. But in this case, we need to make decisions. The world is moving too fast not to. The example here that I want to give you is Barry Murphy at Airbnb. This is his learning tech ecosystem. They're a small company and they continue to invest in technology. He did a panel for me a few years ago. He spoke for me a couple of years ago, and he said that when he got there to Airbnb, he took a look at the suite of technology that they had and basically said, what's going on here? Looked at the usage and nobody was using it, and so he just started unplugging things. And he said he had exactly one phone call of some guy that called him up and said, hey, what happened to that thing? And he said, oh, we got rid of it. And the guy's like, oh, okay, and carried on. So he started unplugging things and then started plugging things in that got better responses. and continues to build out his suite. A couple of things that I really like about it is he's very, I wish you knew Barry, he's great. He's very intentional about the decisions that he makes, and he's very good at working with clients and vendors to figure out exactly what they can do for him. So Plus Plus is actually a scheduler for learning, like classroom learning. He worked with them until it had a functionality for coaching as well, and so that's what they use to set up coaching activities within the organization. So he's continually trying things. He's continually unplugging things and putting things in until they work, and then he's monitoring everything to make sure that it works and continues to work. Questions on, actually, I'm gonna finish up and then we'll take questions on everything. So to build an ecosystem, here are the things that we learned that we need to consider: the philosophy, the structure, the sustainability, and the evolution. There are lots and lots of choices out there. It's a really confusing space, and the more guidance we have and the more sure we are in the direction that we're trying to head, the more successful we'll be in building those learning tech ecosystems. This is the report on this. If you want it, the QR code works. Also, you can also shoot us a note at RedThread Research, and I'll make sure you get both the report and the infographic that goes along with it.
Okay, I think you deserve an applause for this. Big applause. Thank you, Dani. Good, there is some nice time left for further questioning. So who has an additional question? Can be of the last part, but also if you said, hey, some of the previous parts, the question popped up, it's okay.
Firstly, I'd just love to download your brain. That would be fantastic. The intentional ecosystem, so heading towards the right on that arrow, did a lot of the people that you talk to have to get rid of legacy systems? Because legacy data can cause a massive problem when you're trying to move into that space. So I just wonder how much of an issue that was for people. So
a lot of them did have to get rid of systems for sure. Legacy data is kind of a big deal. If you read the learning impact paper, it can give you some ideas on how they did that.
Dani, let's say I want to have a learning ecosystem by Monday. What would be the first steps to consider?
I mean, I think they're in the order that you would do them. I'm not sure you can come up with a complete philosophy even by Monday, but I think they're in the order that you need to sort of address them. So philosophy, structure, sustainability, and then ongoing evolution.
Cool.
Other
Who already has an ecosystem, learning ecosystem in place in their organization?
Just out of curiosity, how many of those are intentional? Who has an ecosystem that's intentional in their organization?
Intentional, okay, yeah.
Nice. I would love to
Who
talk
wants
to you.
one? Who wants one? Who's going to work on that really hard? Okay, cool. Great. Questions? Yeah.
I was just interested in your point about continuous evolution, because we so often hear the word transformation and we must transform everything. I was wondering if there was any examples where people have tried to transform things as opposed to your point, which I think is very valid, about continuously evolving.
Yes, there are very many examples of that. Most of them require a very large implementation in usually one system. When they're talking about transformation, they're usually looking for the solution so that their bosses will get off their back or pat them on the back or something. Evolution is a much more deliberate thing. It's a much harder thing. But I also think it's the way that we're moving in the future. Just the way the technology companies are going and the way that business is going, we can't afford, do I want to say this? Yes. We can't afford to spend $10 million every 10 years and let it ride. It has to be nurtured just like an ecosystem is nurtured. It has to be or we're going to fail.
Hi, is that on? Yeah, hi, sorry. It's less of a question and more of a comment, which you might agree or disagree with, but I thought it was interesting a moment ago when you asked how many people thought they'd got a learning ecosystem and not many people put their hands up. I would suggest that every single one of us has a learning ecosystem, and perhaps the good first step is to go out there and have a good look at it, pull it up by the roots and see what it is and what it does and how healthy it is and whether or not it needs a little bit of pruning or a little bit of additional planting. But we've all got one.
I would 100% agree with that. It's a matter of how intentional it is, as you just mentioned. Yep.
Would starting as second step with pruning and, like you said, plugging out, could that be a smart approach?
I think it would be brilliant. Once
Yeah.
you have a philosophy going through and sunsetting everything that doesn't work, I think it's a great idea.
Okay, and you just plug out until some people really start complaining. Then you know,
Well,
then you hit the sweet spot.
I would probably pay attention to the usage data, but
Yeah.
and
Okay. Great. Oh yeah.
So the organisation I work at, we're really starting to look at this stuff, and we've used this paper here as a sort of framework to do that. We're quite a small organisation, but is that every week we find a new system somewhere, buried somewhere, that's doing something that looks like learning. And you mentioned yourself that organisations don't really fully appreciate how much they have. So have you got any advice for how to go about fleshing or fishing all those out? Because it's actually quite a difficult thing to do.
no. I would probably start with balance sheets. Just start looking at what's been bought by business units particularly. Deloitte did some research a few years ago that basically estimated 1.5 times the L&D budget is spent elsewhere in the organization. And so just looking at budgets and understanding IT and finance is probably where I go.
Hi.
Hi.
You were talking about continuous evolution and user experience. And so you would think that the users themselves will be bringing some of this evolution with them. So maybe picking up technologies and bringing that to the ecosystem. Did you see much evidence of that?
Yeah, the example I gave about WhatsApp is a really good example of that. For whatever reason, a lot of vendors will replicate things that are already working perfectly well. So like a YouTube or a Yammer. There are technologies that exist in the real world that people are already using, and so why find something that replicates it? Just use the thing that's already there. It takes a little, there's a little bit more effort involved. It's either surveying or just paying really close attention to what your people are using. But that's where I would start.
Yeah, and how can you handle that? Because that can be really annoying that all kind of colleagues just said, hey, I learned about this new app, let's use it. And in a few weeks or months you have to use so many apps. So how can you be a conductor in that, and who should do it? Do you have any ideas on that?
It's a good question. I think there's no way we're going to control our learners or our employees. We're not going to be able to tell them to quit using WhatsApp for learning. I think it's more of just figuring out what's being used and adopt it or adapt it or find a way to block it if it's damaging to the organization. Chris Peary always says, use what you've got. Start with what you've got. Don't go buy something until you know exactly what's being used.
And if it's strong enough, it will survive, and
Right.
otherwise...
Hi. I'm wondering whether you have noticed any correlation between organizational culture and also the ecosystem of learning tech. So are there any correspondences, or is...
Yeah, so the green slide that has those characteristics of the one platform, that's probably the best thing we have for a correlation. Those companies that are a little bit more closed and a little bit more timid tend to rely on one system, whereas those that are much more open and open to failure tend to gravitate toward the other side.
Hi, mine's a really, really simple question, but in L&D we love just coming up with random names for stuff. When we talk about ecosystems, are we talking about learning tech stacks?
Yep, we debated what we were going to call that. We ended up with ecosystems, but yes, tech stack. Yes, same thing. Anything else before we wrap up? Okay, I think there's some sort of food out there. So
competition. Okay. Thank you all for being here, for your great questions. And one more time, thank you so much for sharing this with us.